Hello, and welcome back to another episode of On the Beaten Track. I'm your host, Rihanna. I'm recording this post-Cape Town storm, hectic storm, which means I'm fully engaged on the feedback and the interactions with the Peter Jones episode, especially on TikTok. I must say, love the really going, never knew this person, so happy you brought it to us. People telling me their stories. One user shared and it just really felt apt for me to share what they said. There's no name. I wouldn't give it anyway because it was so brave to share. I was taken to the same Dr. Lang after a week in detention. I decided to secretly go on hunger strike. However, I did not even take water for 3 days. On the 4th day, my health deteriorated, and the police took me to Lang. I was determined to be released as I knew that they had no real case against me. I learned this just by the questions they put to me. As he examined me, I asked him who he was. He said he was the infamous doctor and asked if I had any objection to him examining me. At that stage, the extent of the negative publicity had clearly had an impact on him. I told him to continue with the examination, thinking the next guy he would send me to would be a real brute. He told the police that I should have an hour outside every day in the sun, not a small achievement for a weekend's hunger strike. Furthermore, the cops, Hatting and his sidekick, suddenly became eager to have me released. They didn't want another embarrassment. After 21 days in solitary confinement, I was released. During that time, I found out that the guy in the cell next to me was my friend, Patrick Mandisi Titi of the Black Community Projects. He had been there for 8 months already when I first got there. We used to sing together, he in his cell and me in mine, thumping on the wall to keep the beat. He never knew it was me, as we were not allowed to communicate. I tried once to shout out to him, but soon got a visit from the shortest white cop in Sanlam building. It was only in the years before the first election that I would meet him again. He had been in exile in Canada after skipping the country via Lesotho. The power the state had over detainees was frightening. You could disappear and they would just say that you had escaped. The fact that medical doctors worked in collaboration with the state was also scary. They had no ethics or morals when they served the state in the name of white supremacy. A calloused bunch of the most crude people brimming with entitlement. Thank you for what you do. I hope you continue your work. There are so many stories to tell. The user also privately then messaged me and said, it's only when I see these things that I remember who I am. And I felt that really deeply. So thank you so much for sharing with me. It's real privilege to tell these stories. I'm also recording this post my husband and I attending the spectacular play at the Baxter Theatre of Rise of 76. As you guys know, I have recorded that episode. I've done the research, did the deep dive, written the details, the expression of humanity, the good and the bad. And the gambit of emotion that play evoked is really something to be experienced. At the time of release, you will probably have a few days left until the 30th to experience this play. I highly, highly recommend it. The acting is phenomenal. It is emotive. It is devastating. Found many of the audience crying. We were in tears, but also there was this visceral response to things that were going on stage. And you don't always get that when you go to plays because this is so close to the bone. And it is the 50th anniversary this year. It's just something to experience. It is a time of remembrance, reflection, and always hold these stories as an example of never again, right? Never again will this happen. Never again will we allow anyone to diminish us as South Africans and murder our children. Then, just as my normal, if you're not subscribed, please consider giving the subscribe button some love. I have reviewed the stats on YouTube, and about 81% of you who are watching are not subscribed, which is actually down from 90%. But the subscriptions really help me with the platform and to continue making these videos. You can hype the video, you can comment on it. Yeah, I really do appreciate, especially on TikTok. I'm going back to TikTok. You guys have been amazing. And it's heartwarming seeing all your responses. Let's get on to today's episode. Okay. Today we shine the light on someone whose name appears in every serious account of the Black consciousness movement in South Africa. Also seems like a pretty cool guy. And yet who has never received the sustained individual attention his life deserves. His name is, and I've noticed this every time that they put the English name first, but his name is Ranwedzi Harry Nengwekhulu. He was one of the founding members of SASO. He was elected its permanent organizer at the very first meeting. He was banned by the apartheid government in 1973. He was the first figure of the Black consciousness movement to go into exile, crossing into Botswana in September of that year, with security police at his heels. And he spent the years that followed building from the outside the international networks that kept the movement alive. He's still alive. Seems like we're entering the age where some people are still kicking around, are still around and kicking. President Cyril Ramaphosa awarded him the Order of Lutulu in gold, one of South Africa's highest national honors. Speaking at the ceremony, Nengwekhulu said the award was not for his personal glory. He dedicated it to his comrades, to those who had paid the ultimate price. That instinct to deflect recognition towards the collective, to insist that no struggle is built by one person, is entirely characteristic of the man who spent his most consequential years doing the unglamorous structural work that revolutions actually run on. He was the organizer, the builder of networks, the person who made things function. But let's not underestimate the intellectual dimension of his contribution. One of the most important early theoretical documents of the Black consciousness movement was written by Harry Nengwekhulu in a 1976 paper presented to the United Nations Center Against Apartheid, written from exile, while the movement he had helped build was being crushed inside South Africa. He set out with clarity and analytical force exactly what Black consciousness was and why it was necessary. His contemporaries noticed this too. In testimony recorded for the SADC's Hashim Mbita Liberation History Project, a fellow activist described him as very astute ideologically and very creative. If you talk about somebody who actually produces revolutionary ideas around which people can mobilize, Harry Nengwekhulu probably would be a leading light in that. So, a founder, a thinker, or organizer, a man honored by the president of his country 8 decades into a life lived in service to its liberation. Let's tell his story properly. There's a lot of words here that Rihanna is probably going to mess up, so bear with me, people. We're going to get there. Ranwedzi Harry Nengwekhulu came from Lununwi. Is that right? In what was then the Venda homeland in the far north of South Africa. He attended high school at Chukuma, part of the country geographically remote from the urban centers where South African liberation politics had historically been concentrated. He had said that his long journey towards political activism began at home in Chukuma, in the daily experience of what apartheid system of Bantu education meant in practice in a rural homeland under the authority of ethnic Bantustan structures that the apartheid government used to define and manage South Africans Black South Africans. We haven't really dug into the Homeland System, but I will be talking through it and what happened to them post-apartheid. Okay. So the Homeland System is one of apartheid's most dehumanizing inventions. It denied Black people South African citizenship. Yes, they did. Consigned them to ethnically defined territories with few resources and imposed puppet government structures on communities that had no meaningful power. Okay, we'll dig a little bit more in a future episode on what that means. He said, I used to say that when I grew up, the police no longer bothered to arrest us. Our parents arrested us. Because, we wanted to get involved in politics, they would tell you will end up like Mandela and Sobukwe on Robben Island. So, the people around you was kind of curtailing your political activism because they felt it's the only way to keep you safe. From those beginnings, he made his way to the University of the North, known as Turfloop. Ding, 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 always coming back. At Turfloop, Nengwekhulu became president of the Student Representative Council, and it was in that role and through the connections that came with it that he encountered the ideas and the people that would change the direction of his life. In July 1968, Nengwekhulu later recalled in interviews that he met student activists from across the country, including Steve Biko and Barney Pichiana. Biko led a walkout of Black students from the NUSA's conference over a dispute that crystallized exactly why so many Black students were losing patience with multiracial liberal organizations. If you remember from the Steve Biko episodes, the immediate trigger was accommodation. The white students at the conference refused to sleep in Black residential areas as the Black delegates were being asked to do. They were worried about arrest under the apartheid laws on racial mixing, but the Black delegates regularly took that risk. For white students, NUSA's was a nice, friendly club. For Black students, the injustice was existential. Biko walked out. The moment mattered. Biko's vision for an exclusive Black student organization was already formed. That same year in 1968, he came to Turfloop, invited to speak at the campus that Nengwekhulu and Pichiana helped organize. The visit radicalized the Turfloop student body further. When students at Fort Hare were expelled for protesting shortly after, Turfloop students struck in solidarity. Nengwekhulu, as SRC president, was amongst those expelled from the university in consequence. He had been expelled for standing with his comrades, which is a pattern that you see with these students who asked for dignity, equality, and a better education. It would not be the last time that the system tried to punish him for exactly that. In July 1969, SASO was formally launched at the conference held at Turfloop, Nengwekhulu's own campus, now the organizational home of the new movement. Steve Biko was elected president, Barney Pichiana secretary. Other members of the founding executive included Nengwekhulu, Musi Machaka from Turfloop, Srini Mudli from the University College of Durban, Westville. At the founding conference, Harry Nengwekhulu was elected as SASO's Permanent Organiser. I love how they have like a position for this. Yet the title mattered. Permanent Organiser, not president, not secretary general, the organizer, the person whose job was to make the whole thing actually work, to build branches, coordinate between campuses, keep activists connected across a country that was doing everything in its power to prevent exactly that kind of connection. Pivotal role. Turfloop had become, in an almost ironic reversal of the apartheid government's intention, one of the most important incubators of Black consciousness in the country. The student activism there spread beyond the campus into the villages of the Northern Transvaal, turning a rural backwater, as the government had imagined it, into a seedbed of revolutionary consciousness. Between 1969 and 1973, Nengwekhulu served as SASO's full-time national organizer. This is 4 years of building a movement from the ground up across a country designed to fragment and isolate Black South Africans. Just remember, in the context of Black consciousness, Black South Africans is everybody that's not white. And given the racial segregation from racial classification, and everybody kind of having their own education system, their own universities, their own spaces and areas, it really is amazing that over that 4 years, the connections and the connectiveness that was built from this movement. So 4 years of traveling between campuses, establishing branches, maintaining relationship between students who were being watched, harassed, and periodically detained by the security police. He was also in charge of RESO, the Reef SASO branch, covering Johannesburg and the Transvaal, which included student affiliates at UNISA and other institutions across the region. This was organizational work of real complexity, building a structure that would survive the attention of the state, that could pass information and maintain momentum without giving the security apparatus easy targets. He was also, throughout this period, thinking and writing about what Black consciousness actually meant, not just as a slogan, but as a philosophy, an analysis, and a program. His 1979 paper for the United Nations Center Against Apartheid, written after he was already in exile, is one of the most lucid theoretical statements the movement produced. I'll put the link in the description box below if you want to read that paper. It is on the South African History site. Yes, that's where I found it. He traced the origins of Black consciousness to the demoralization that followed the Sharpeville massacre of 1960. After Sharpeville, after the mass arrests and the bannings and the imprisonment of an entire generation of leadership, Black political life in South Africa had gone quiet. Not because the desire for liberation had died, but because the system had succeeded temporarily in making people afraid. Nengwekhulu wrote about fear with unusual directness, the fear that was pervasive, omnipresent fact of life in Black communities, and how it was deliberately maintained by the state as an instrument of control. Black consciousness, he argued, was the answer to that fear, not a program of action, not yet, but a prior act of psychological and moral reclamation. You cannot fight for your freedom, he was saying, if you have internalized the belief that you are not worth freedom. The movement Nengwekhulu was organizing on the ground was doing this work in practice. Self-help projects in Black communities, adult literacy, community health, cultural programs. The Black community programs established alongside Biko Pichana, Mampela Rampela, Beni Kuopa, and Mapetla Mohape, drawing on the support of church structures and eventually international funding through bodies like the International University Exchange Fund, were building the material reality of what Black self-reliance could look like. The government watched all of this and made its calculation. In March 1973, it moved against the entire BCM leadership in a single coordinated swoop. Steve Biko was banned and confined to Kim Williamstown. Barney Pichana was banned, and Harry Nengwekhulu was banned alongside them. Part of the group of 8 BCM leaders hit simultaneously with 5-year banning orders. Crazy. For Nengwekhulu, banning order carried a particular additional weight. He had just in the aftermath of the 1973 Durban strikes. You guys remember that? The massive wave of Black worker action that had shaken the country because there was no violence and people just down tools. So he had just in the aftermath of that been doing some of the most consequential organizing of his career. The movement was growing, connecting, beginning to find its wider social base. So we started university, and it bled into the communities, and then they had all these community programs, and now the state had shut it down. As always with these banning orders, you can't attend gatherings, you can't be quoted, you can't be communicating with your comrades. And the person whose entire contribution had been built around connection, around building structures between people, was now legally prohibited from doing exactly that. That must have been super frustrating. He stayed in South Africa for a matter of months after the banning, and then in September 1973 made a decision that set him apart from all the others. He crossed the border into Botswana. He was the first senior figure in the Black consciousness movement to go into exile. Going into exile, as I've expressed many times before, is not an easy choice. You're leaving behind everything you know, your country, your family, your community, this man that had built this community and this connections. And now you're leaving it all behind with no certainty about when or whether you would ever return. For Nengwekhulu, it also meant leaving behind this movement that he had spent years building at a moment when it was under enormous pressure. Tough choice. But the banning order had made meaningful internal work impossible, and there was a different kind of work to be done from the outside. In Botswana, Nengwekhulu began establishing the international connections that the BCM urgently needed. He built close links with Sweden, whose government and civil society were among the most consistent international supporters of Southern African liberation movements throughout this period. Go Sweden. He connected with the International University Exchange Fund, which channeled Nordic funding to BCM-linked organizations inside South Africa, including the community health and education projects that Biko was running from King Williamstown. The timing was significant. Nengwekhulu left in September 1973. The following February 1974, his comrade Abraham Tiro was killed in Botswana by a parcel bomb sent by the South African Security Police. Tiro had been at Turfloop. He had been expelled for a speech at his graduation ceremony denouncing Bantu education. He'd become one of the movement's most important organizers, and now the apartheid state reached state's reach had extended across borders to kill him. Nengwekhulu knew this could happen to any of them. He kept working. He taught at the University of Botswana, a continuation of the parallel work that several BCM figures maintained. Activism alongside academic and educational work, teaching education itself as a form of resistance. He remained connected to the internal movement in South Africa, helping to organize the flow of information and materials across the border. In February 1977, the Black People's Convention, the adult wing of BCM, held an extraordinary Congress in Durban. It was an important moment of consolidation, despite everything the state had thrown at the movement. At the Congress, Steve Biko was elected honorary life president of BPC, and Harry Nengwekhulu, in absentia, because he was still in exile, was elected Director General of the BPC's newly established Secretariat for External Affairs. That's a mouthful, but I think you get what I mean. That same year, BPC leadership mandated him to set up a formal office in Botswana. The office became a hub organizing and distributing literature for BCM-linked youth organizations, maintaining the infrastructure of the movement that was being systematically dismantled inside South Africa by a state that had already murdered Biko in September 1977 and was hunting the remaining leadership. Nengwekhulu was also, throughout this period, working towards something that never came to pass. He was instrumental in trying to set up meetings between the ANC, still operating from Exile in Lusaka and Tanzania, and Steve Biko. The two strands of the liberation movement had different histories and different philosophies. The ANC was older and with deeper international recognition and a long established relationship with the South African Communist Party. The BCM was newer and more internally generated, suspicious of arrangements made from the outside. But Nengwekhulu believed the movements needed to talk to each other. He worked towards these meetings. They never happened because Biko was killed before they could. Nengwekhulu remained in exile for years, moving through Botswana and other countries, continuing his international advocacy work, keeping the BCM visible in the global forums at a time when the South African government was working hard to present itself as a legitimate state, facing only communist-inspired terrorism. He was in exile as in Turfloop, the organizer, the person who did the structural work that allowed everything else to exist. After the democratic elections of 1994, Harry Nengwekhulu returned to South Africa and went to work in government and public service. He was appointed acting Superintendent General of the Eastern Cape Department of Education, one of the most challenging education briefs in the country, in a province historically underserved and burdened with severe inequality. He was later appointed to the South African Management Development Institute, an arm of the Department of Public Service Administration, as Director General, a senior national post concerned with building capacity and professionalizing government structures in the new democratic state. He was then seconded to the Northern Province government as Superintendent General of Education, the Northern Province government, which eventually became the Limpopo. And it was in that role that he ran into a situation that tells you a great deal about who he is. Generally, you'll find this coming out with the guys of that time, or this movement. In late 2000s, he was suspended by the Education MEC Edgar Mushwana in circumstances that were widely reported at the time. The official reasons given was vague, but sources close to the department painted a clearer picture. Nengwekhulu had refused to appoint the MEC's wife to a school principal position, overriding the recommendation of the school's governing body. He had refused to accept what was described as a donation of printing equipment, a so-called donation that would in fact have cost the department between 25 and 30 million rand through inflated per-print charges, and would have undermined a cabinet decision that all government printing go through government printers. He had refused to pay consultants who had been engaged without following a proper tender procedure. In other words, he had refused to be corrupt, and a politician who wanted him to be corrupt had suspended him. Nengwekhulu said publicly that he did not accept the suspension and would challenge it. He did. The pattern of the suspension, clearly politically motivated without a convincing substantive case, echoed exactly the fate of his predecessor in that post. There is a continuity here that is worth naming. This is a man who, as a student leader at Turfloop in 1968, had been expelled for refusing to accept what the university authorities wanted to impose, who as SASO's national organizer had built a movement by refusing to accept the terms on which the apartheid state wanted Black South Africans to understand themselves, who in exile had refused to allow the movement to be silenced or become invisible, and who in post-apartheid government service refused when asked to participate in the corruption that was already beginning to hollow out the new democracy to play along. The movement had always said that the struggle was not just against apartheid as a legal system, but against the deeper conditions, economic exploitation, elite capture, the denial of human dignity, that apartheid was one expression of. Nengwekhulu seems to have taken that seriously in ways that created problems for people who had not. He was also recognized for his educational contribution. UNISA, through which so many BCM activists had studied by correspondence while under banning orders or in exile, awarded him its Outstanding Educator in South Africa award. In retirement, Nengwekhulu has continued to consult on national, traditional leadership, work that connects to the broader questions about identity, community, and political authority that have threaded through his entire life. He runs a consultancy based in Pretoria. And then in April 2024, as we mentioned at the top of this episode, President Cyril Ramaphosa placed the Order of Lutulu in gold around his neck, the highest tier of one of South Africa's highest honors, for his gallant fight for the liberation of the people of South Africa. He said it had been a long journey, starting with his high school days in the former Venda homeland. It had not been easy. He dedicated the honor to his comrades, deflecting as he always did, to those who paid the ultimate price. I want to say something in closing about what it means to be the organizer. In the revolutionary movement, they are the visible figures, and we've spoken about them. Ones whose names end up in the book covers, whose faces appear on the murals, whose words get quoted in Parliament. But then there are the people who make it possible for these figures to exist. The ones who build the infrastructure to travel when it is dangerous to travel, who make the phone calls and set up the meetings and write the documents and hold the thing together when it is under pressure. Harry Nengwekhulu was the latter and the former. He was the first BCM senior figure to go into exile, which took extraordinary courage. The ideological thinker who wrote one of the clearest theoretical statements the movement produced. He was the bridge builder who tried to connect the BCM and the ANC. Was the educational official who refused to be corrupt when corrupt was what the system wanted him to be. He came from that previous Venda homeland and he's still here. And in April 2024, President of a free South Africa stood across from him and said, "We see you. We see what you did. We know what it cost, and we are grateful." On the psychological challenge of Black consciousness, Harry Nengwekhulu said, "The challenge of Black consciousness for any Black man in South Africa today is the need for a new and incisive redefinition, re-identification, and reappraisal of the Black totality in the context of a capitalist, racist, and exploitative South Africa." Harry Nengwekhulu gave up his life, moved away from his country and the connections that he had built, left this country, left everything he knew behind to be able to continue doing the work and do it better without the constraints that were being put on them by the South African government. And as I said earlier, we see you. We see what we did, what you did. We see what you gave up. We see this long road that you have traveled from Turfloop in 1969. Every step you've taken, you've earned the recognition and appreciation that this country should show you every day. Thank you for your service. Thank you for what you did. And that is the end of this episode. Thank you everybody for joining. Please remember to subscribe if you're not subscribed already. Like this video, comment on this video, hype the video, and I will see you next week. Bye.